The Galactic Academy of Diplomatic Sciences stood on a moon that orbited no planet, a structure of glass and light that hung in the endless dark between stars. And it was here that the future leaders of 1,000 worlds came to learn the arts of peace. For 300 years, the Academy had welcomed students from every corner of known space. And in all that time, it had never once accepted a human. Not because humans were banned, but because humans were new. And humans were frightening, and no one was quite sure what to do with them, but this year was different. This year, the Galactic Council had decided that humanity needed to be integrated. And integration meant education. And education meant sending one of their young to learn alongside the children of species who had traveled between stars when humans were still living in caves. Her name was Kira Vasquez, and she arrived on Tuesday. The transport ship that brought her was small and unremarkable. A standard diplomatic shuttle painted in Earth Federation colors. And when it docked at the Academy's port, there were no crowds waiting to greet her. No ceremonies or speeches, just a single administrative assistant. Holding a tablet with her name on it, Kira stepped off the shuttle and looked around with calm brown eyes that took in everything and revealed nothing. She was not tall by any standard, and she was not particularly strong-looking either. Just a young woman of 22 years with dark hair pulled back from her face and skin that had been tanned by a sun most of the galaxy had never seen. The administrative assistant was a Malorian, a species that resembled tall birds with 4 arms and feathers that changed color based on their emotional state. And when Kira approached him, his feathers shifted from professional blue to nervous yellow. "You are the human," he said. And it was not a question. "I am," Kira replied. And she smiled. The Malorian's feathers went pale. He had read about human smiles in the orientation materials the Academy had distributed to all staff. And he knew intellectually that the baring of teeth was a gesture of friendliness among her kind. But 300 million years of evolution screamed at him that a predator was showing its weapons and he should fly away immediately. He did not fly away because he was a professional. But his voice was higher than usual when he spoke again. "Please follow me to your quarters." Kira followed the Academy, was beautiful in a way that made her chest tight with wonder. And she tried not to stare too obviously at the curved corridors that seemed to breathe with soft light, at the windows that showed impossible views of distant nebulae, at the students who passed her in the halls and tried very hard to pretend they were not staring. She saw Kovathi with their long robes and longer memories, beings who had been philosophers when her ancestors were learning to walk upright. She saw Vorthans with their scaled skin and proud bearing, warriors who had conquered and then been conquered and then found peace. She saw Kethri who moved like liquid silver, and Thalaxians who communicated in colors, and a dozen other species whose names she had memorized but never expected to see in person. They all looked at her. They all looked the way Kira understood. Or at least she thought she did, because she had grown up hearing the whispers about her homeworld, the planet that the galactic community had classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, one of the most dangerous places in the known universe, where life could still exist. She had heard the stories. They told about Earth. They spoke of a world where the very air could kill you if you breathed it in the wrong place, where water fell from the sky in quantities that would flood entire cities on other planets, where the ground itself would shake and split without warning and mountains would vomit fire. They spoke of the creatures that lived there, of sharks that could smell blood from miles away, of insects whose venom could stop a heart in minutes, of bacteria so aggressive that they had nearly wiped out humanity multiple times before humans learned to fight back. They spoke of humans themselves, the strangest and most terrifying product of that terrifying world. Beings who had evolved to be afraid of everything and had survived anyway, who had looked at a universe that wanted them dead and had simply refused to die. Kira had grown up with these stories, and she had always found them strange. Because to her Earth was just home, just the place where her grandmother had taught her to garden, and her father had taught her to cook, and her mother had taught her that diplomacy was the art of making enemies into friends. But she was starting to understand now, watching the way the other students gave her a wide berth in the corridors. The way their conversations would stop when she approached and resume when she passed to them. She was not Kira Vasquez, daughter of the ambassador, student of languages and cultures and the delicate dance of interspecies relations. To them she was a Deathworlder, a predator, a thing to be feared. Her quarters were small but comfortable, with a bed that adjusted to her body temperature and a window that showed her the stars she had crossed to get here. And when the Malorian left her alone, she sat on the edge of the bed and wondered if she had made a mistake. She had wanted this so badly, had worked so hard to be chosen for this program, had believed with all her heart that she could be a bridge between her people and the rest of the galaxy. But bridges needed to be walked on from both sides. And right now she was not sure anyone would be willing to take that first step toward her. There was a chime at her door. Kira opened it to find a small creature standing in the hallway, barely reaching her waist, with fur that was soft and gray and eyes that were large and curious. "Hello," the creature said. "I am Pip and I am your neighbor, and I brought you a welcome gift because my mother says it is important to be kind to new people, even when they are scary." Pip held out a small cake that smelled of honey and something floral. Kira knelt down so she was at eye level with her visitor, and she smiled her predator smile. And she said thank you in a voice that was soft and warm. Pip's ears twitched with nervousness, but she did not run away. "You are not as scary as I thought you would be," Pip admitted. "I get that a lot," Kira said, and for the first time since she had arrived at the academy, she felt like maybe things were going to be okay. She had no idea how wrong she was. Rex's Town had been the most important student at the Galactic Academy for 2 years, and he intended to keep it that way. He was a Vorthan, which meant he was tall and strong and covered in scales that gleamed like polished copper in the light. And his family had held seats on the Commerce Council for 15 generations, which meant everyone knew that his future was already written in gold. The Vorthans had been conquerors once, back in the Dark Ages before the Galactic Council had brought peace to the stars. And even though those days were long past, the instinct for dominance still ran deep in their blood. Rexus did not need to fight to prove his superiority because everyone already knew he was superior. But he enjoyed the little games of power that the Academy's social hierarchy demanded. The subtle shows of force that reminded everyone of their place when a Korvathi student forgot to bow when passing him in the corridor. Rexus would simply stop and stare until the apology came when a Malorian sat in his preferred seat in the dining hall. Rexus would stand over them until they moved. These were small things, petty things perhaps, but they were the currency of respect, and Rexus had spent 2 years accumulating more of it than anyone else. Then the human arrived and everything changed. At first, Rexus was not concerned because he had read the reports about humanity, and he knew they were supposed to be dangerous, but he had never actually seen one before. And this one did not look dangerous at all. She was small, smaller than him by at least a head, and she moved through the Academy's halls with a quiet confidence that could have been mistaken for meekness by anyone who was not paying attention. Rexus was always paying attention. He noticed the way she walked, smooth and balanced, like she was ready to move in any direction at any moment. And he noticed the way her eyes tracked movement, even when she pretended not to be looking. And he noticed most of all that she did not seem to notice him. This was unprecedented. Everyone noticed Rexus. Everyone deferred to Rexus. Everyone stepped aside when Rexus walked by and lowered their voices when Rexus was near. But this human just walked past him like he was not there at all. The first time it happened, he told himself it was because she was new and did not know the rules yet. The second time it happened, he positioned himself directly in her path in the corridor and waited for her. To stop and apologize for almost walking into him, she stepped around him without breaking stride, like he was a piece of furniture that had been placed inconveniently in her way, and continued her conversation with the small gray creature called Pip, who had somehow become her constant companion. Rex stood there with his scales darkening in embarrassment and watched her go. The third time it happened, he made a comment to his friends about primitive species that was loud enough for her to hear. And she turned and looked at him with those calm brown eyes and said, "Yes, Earth is quite primitive compared to Vortha. We still have to grow our food in actual dirt. Can you imagine?" And then she turned back to her conversation like he had said nothing important at all. His friends laughed because they thought she had insulted herself. But Rexus saw the truth. She had not insulted herself. She had dismissed him. Word began to spread through the academy that the human was not afraid of Rexus. Tal and Rexus could feel his carefully built empire beginning to crack at the foundations, because fear was the mortar that held it together. And if one person was not afraid, then others might start to wonder why they should be. Began to research humans obsessively. He spent hours in the Academy's archives reading everything he could find about Earth and its inhabitants, and the more he read, the less he understood how this small, soft creature could be related to the monsters the reports described. He read about their endurance, how they could pursue prey for days without stopping until their target simply collapsed from exhaustion. And he looked at Kira sleeping peacefully in class and could not reconcile the image. He read about their violence, how they had invented weapons capable of destroying entire cities and had actually used them on each other. And he looked at Kira helping Pip with her homework and could not make it make sense. He read about their survival instincts, how they had evolved in an environment so hostile that they had learned to see threats everywhere even when none existed. And he looked at Kira smiling at everyone who spoke to her and decided that the reports must be exaggerated, or perhaps this particular human was simply defective. She had not been raised on Earth after all, but on a diplomatic station surrounded by soft carpets and climate control and all the comforts that civilization could provide. And maybe that had bred the danger out of her. She was like a Vorthan who had never learned to fight. Rexus decided, a creature wearing the skin of a predator, but with none of the instincts that made predators frightening. He decided to prove it if he could show everyone that the human was not dangerous, that she was just another weak creature, pretending to be something she was not. Then his status would be restored, and everything would go back to the way it was supposed to be. He began to plan. He told his friends what he intended to do, and they were nervous at first, because weapons were forbidden on campus, and the punishment for bringing one was expulsion. But Rexus reminded them of who his family was and what his future held, and they agreed that the risk was worth it. Acquired a knife. It was not just any knife, but his family's ceremonial blade, an heirloom from the days when Vorthans still settled their disputes with steel. And it was sharp and beautiful, and exactly the kind of thing that would make a normal person freeze in terror. He practiced throwing it until he could put it within inches of any target he chose. He was not going to hurt her, of course, because that would be going too far, and even his family's influence might not be enough to protect him from the consequences of injuring a diplomat's daughter. He was just going to scare her. He was going to show everyone what happened when you stripped away the mythology and the fear and looked at a human for what she really was, just another soft creature in a universe full of soft creatures. Just another target. He chose Professor Thalvan's class for the demonstration because it was the one class they shared, and because the subject was conflict resolution, which made the whole thing poetic in a way that Rexus appreciated. He walked into class that day with the knife hidden in his bag and a smile on his face, and the absolute certainty that he was about to restore the natural order of things. He had no idea what he was walking into. He had studied humans, but he had not understood them. Had learned what they did, but not what they were. He was about to find out. The lecture hall was shaped like a bowl with seats rising up in Tiers from a central stage where Professor Thelvan stood surrounded by floating screens that displayed his notes in 17 different languages. Thelvan was old even by Korvati standards, which meant he had been alive when humanity was still figuring out how to split the atom. And his robes were the deep purple of a master philosopher who had spent centuries studying the nature of conflict and the paths to peace. He was speaking about de-escalation techniques when Kira walked in. She was 5 minutes early, as always, because her mother had taught her that punctuality was the first courtesy. And she took a seat in the 3rd row next to Pip, who had saved her a space. The hall was nearly full with students from at least 30 different species, and Kira had learned most of their names over the past few weeks, had learned their customs and their histories and the small gestures that meant friendship or respect or please leave me alone. She had also learned that Rexus Town sat in the back row with his friends, and that it was best to pretend he did not exist, because acknowledging him only seemed to make things worse. Today she noticed that he was watching her more intently than usual, but she pushed the observation to the back of her mind because Professor Thelvan was beginning his lecture, and she genuinely wanted to learn. Conflict, the professor said in a voice like wind through ancient trees, is inevitable, but violence is a choice, and the purpose of this course is to give you the tools to make better choices. He gestured, and the screens around him shifted to show images of historical conflicts, wars that had burned across star systems and consumed billions of lives before someone finally found the words to make them stop. Today we will discuss the moment of crisis, the instant when a situation tips from tension into violence, and we will learn to recognize that moment so that we can intervene before it arrives. Kira took notes because she took notes on everything, filling her tablet with observations and questions and connections to things she had learned in other classes. And she was so focused on the lecture that she almost did not notice when Rexus stood up. Almost something in the back of her brain, some ancient alarm system that had been installed by 300,000 years of evolution, noticed the movement and flagged it as important. And she found herself watching him out of the corner of her eye, even as she continued to write. He was walking toward the front of the room. This was unusual because Rexus never participated in class, never asked questions or offered opinions, just sat in the back with his friends and radiated contempt for anyone who tried too hard. Professor Thelvan paused his lecture with a patient expression that suggested he had been teaching for long enough to expect interruptions. Mr. Tal, do you have a question? I have a demonstration, Rexus said, and his voice was loud enough to carry to every corner of the room. I believe in practical learning, Professor, and I think your students would benefit from seeing these concepts in action. Thelvan's crest, a ridge of fine hair that ran from his forehead to the back of his neck, flattened slightly in what Kira had learned to recognize as concern. That is not how this class is conducted. Mr. Town, please return to your seat. Rexus did not return to his seat. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out something that made half the room gasp and the other half freeze in confusion because they had never seen anything like it before. It was a knife. The blade was about as long as Kira's forearm, and it curved slightly near the tip in a design that was meant for slashing as much as stabbing. And the handle was wrapped in leather that had been darkened by generations of earthen hands. It was beautiful in the way that weapons are sometimes beautiful, in the way that speaks of craftsmanship and history and the very real capacity to end a life. Professor Thelvan's crest went completely flat. Mr. Town, weapons are strictly forbidden on this campus. Put that away immediately. In a moment, Rexus said, and he turned to face the class with the knife balanced on his palm, like it was nothing more than a pointer he was using for a presentation. First, I want to talk about humans. The room went very still. Kira felt every eye turned toward her, but she did not move. did not react, just kept her face neutral and her breathing steady and watched Rexus with the same calm attention she gave to everything. "We have all heard the stories," Rexus continued. "The Deathworld, the predators, the endless violence of their history. And we have all seen how our new classmate carries herself, like she is something to be feared. Like we should all bow down before the mighty human." He smiled and his scales caught the light and made him look like something carved from bronze. "But I have done my research and have come to a different conclusion. I think she is soft. I think she has been civilized. I think she has forgotten what she is supposed to be and is just playing a role that her ancestors wrote for her." Professor Thelvin had pressed something on his podium that Kira assumed was a security alert, but she also knew that security was at least 3 minutes away, and a lot could happen in 3 minutes. "So I propose a test," Rexus said. "A simple one. I am going to see if the Deathworlder still has her instincts, or if she is just another diplomat's daughter playing dress-up." He turned to face Kira directly, and she met his eyes without flinching, without looking away, without showing any of the fear he was so desperately trying to provoke. "Let us see if the human can still react like a human," he said, and he threw the knife. The world slowed down. Kira watched the blade spin through the air, watched the light catch the edge with each rotation, watched it come toward her with a speed that would have been impossible to track if she had been anything other than what she was. She did not think thinking was too slow for this. Instead, she let 300,000 years of evolution take over. Let her body remember all the lessons it had learned on a world where hesitation meant death. And she moved. Her hand came up, her fingers closed, the knife stopped, and Kira Vasquez, daughter of diplomats, student of peace, product of the most dangerous planet in the known galaxy, stood in the middle of a lecture hall, holding a blade that had been thrown at her head, and smiled. It was not a polite smile. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of something very old and very patient that had just been given exactly what it wanted. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood that the stories about humans had not been exaggerated at all. 47 students from 32 different species sat frozen in their seats, their minds struggling to process what their eyes had just witnessed. And in the center of it all, Kira stood with the knife in her hand like she had simply plucked it from the air like a falling leaf. She had not moved from her seat so much as flowed out of it. A single continuous motion that had taken her from sitting to standing with the blade, caught mid-rotation in a grip that any weapons instructor would have recognized as perfect. The throw had been good. Rexus had practiced for days to make sure of it. But it had not been good enough. Nothing would have been good enough. Kira looked at the knife in her hand and turned it slowly, examining the craftsmanship with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. And her smile never wavered. "Vorthan's ceremonial design," she said. And her voice was calm and conversational, like she was commenting on the weather. "Pre-unification period, if I am not mistaken. You can tell by the curve of the blade and the pattern on the leather wrapping. This is at least 400 years old." She looked up at Rexus. "Family. Heirloom." It was not a question Rexus could not answer, because Rexus could not move, because Rexus was experiencing something he had never felt before in his entire privileged life. He was afraid not. The small fear of social embarrassment or the distant fear of consequences that might come later, but the deep primal terror of a creature that has suddenly realized it is not the predator in this scenario. His scales had gone pale, almost white, a Vorthan fear response that he had read about in history books, but had never expected to experience firsthand. And his legs felt like they were made of water, and his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Kira began to walk toward him. The students between them pressed back in their seats as she passed, not because she threatened them, but because something in their Hindbrain recognized that they did not want to be between her and her target. She moved with the same fluid grace she always moved with, but now everyone could see it for what it was. The efficient economy of motion that came from growing up on a world where wasted energy could mean the difference between life and death. She stopped in front of Rexus, close enough that he could see the individual threads of her uniform, close enough that he could smell whatever soap she had used that morning, close enough that he could count the flecks of darker brown in her eyes. Those eyes held no anger. That was the strangest part. He had expected rage, had prepared himself for screaming and threats and the kind of explosive violence that the report said humans were capable of. But there was none of that in her expression. There was only that smile, that terrible patient smile, and a kind of calm curiosity that made him feel like a specimen under examination. "You researched humans," Kira said, and her voice was soft enough that only he could hear it. "You read the reports, and you watch the documentaries, and you learned all about what we have done." She tilted her head slightly, a gesture that should have looked innocent but somehow did not. "But you never understood what we are." She took another step closer, and Rexus realized he was shaking. Actually physically shaking, and he could not make it stop, no matter how hard he tried. "Let me explain it to you." Behind them, Professor Thelvan was speaking into a communicator, calling for security, but Kira did not seem to notice or care. Her entire attention focused on the Vorthan, who had thrown a knife at her head. "Earth is not just a dangerous world," she said. "It is a world that has been trying to kill us for as long as we have existed. The air is full of things that want to infect us. The water is full of things that want to eat us. The ground shakes and splits, and sometimes fire comes out of it for no reason at all." She lifted the knife, and Rexus flinched, but she only turned it again, letting him see his own reflection in the polished metal. "We did not survive because we were the strongest. There were always bigger things on Earth. We did not survive because we were the fastest. Almost everything could outrun us in a sprint." Her smile widened just slightly. "We survived because we refused to die." The words hung in the air between them. "We learned to be afraid of everything and to act anyway. We learned to see threats in every shadow and to walk into those shadows regardless. We learned that pain is just information and fear is just a tool and death is just another problem to be solved." She flipped the knife in her hand, a casual gesture that demonstrated complete control, and caught it by the blade. "You thought this would scare me, but I have been handling knives since I was 6 years old. My grandmother taught me to cook, and cooking on Earth means learning to use sharp things without cutting yourself. My mother taught me to garden, and gardening on Earth means learning to deal with things that sting and bite and poison." She offered the knife handle first toward him, but he could not make himself take it. "This is not a weapon to me. This is a tool, and tools are only dangerous to people who do not know how to use them." Security arrived then. 4 large beings in uniform who stopped at the edge of the scene like they were not sure what to do. And Kira finally looked away from Rexus to acknowledge them. "He threw a knife at me," she said in a conversational tone. "I caught it. I do not think anyone is injured, but you might want to check on him because he does not look well." She glanced back at Rexus, who had finally sunk to his knees, his scales still pale, his breathing ragged, his entire worldview crumbling around him. "I think," Kira said, "that he has learned something important today." And she smiled again. And this time, there was something almost kind in it. Something that looked like compassion for a creature that had not understood what it was facing until it was far too late. Professor Thelvan finally found his voice. "Miss Vasquez," he said. "That was extraordinary." Kira shrugged. "That was Tuesday," she said, and she handed the knife to the nearest security officer and returned to her seat like nothing had happened at all. The security officers had taken Rexus away, but nobody had left the lecture hall because nobody could quite bring themselves to move. and Professor Thelvan stood at his podium looking at Kira with an expression of mixed wonder and something that might have been respect. Kira was aware of everyone staring at her, but she had learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do after a moment of crisis was act like it was a big deal. So she just sat in her seat and waited for whatever came next. Pip was trembling beside her, the small gray creature's fur standing on end, and Kira reached over and gently placed a hand on her friend's shoulder. "It is okay," she said quietly. "It is over. You caught it," Pip whispered. "You caught it out of the air like it was nothing." "It was not nothing," Kira admitted. "It was actually quite scary. But scary things still need to be dealt with, and dealing with them means not freezing." Professor Thelvan cleared his throat. "Class," he said, and his voice was steadier now. "I believe we have just witnessed a practical demonstration of exactly what I was trying to teach you today." He looked at Kira, Miss Vasquez. "Would you be willing to explain to your classmates what just happened from your perspective?" Kira considered refusing because she did not like being the center of attention, and she definitely did not like the way everyone was looking at her like she was some kind of monster. But she also understood that this was an opportunity. This was a chance to be a bridge. She stood up slowly and walked to the front of the room. And this time, when the students pressed back in their seats, she made a point of smiling at them. Not the predator smile she had shown Rexus, but the gentle smile her mother used when she was trying to put nervous diplomats at ease. "I am going to tell you a secret," she said. "And the secret is that I was scared." A murmur ran through the room because that was not what anyone had expected to hear. "Humans are always scared," Kira continued. "We evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill us, and we learned very quickly that fear keeps you alive. So we feel it all the time. That constant awareness that something might go wrong at any moment." She looked around the room at all the different faces watching her. "The difference is what we do with that fear." She began to pace slowly. Not like a predator stalking, but like a teacher trying to make a point. Some species evolve to freeze when they are afraid, to become very still and hope the danger passes them by. And that is a valid survival strategy on worlds where predators track movement. She nodded toward a group of Nalorians, whose feathers had turned a nervous yellow. Some species evolved to run, to put distance between themselves and the threat. And that works on worlds where you can outrun the things that want to eat you. She gestured toward the Kethri section, where several students were practically vibrating with barely suppressed flight instinct. Humans evolved to fight. She stopped pacing and faced the class directly. Not because we were good at it. Not at first anyway. We were small and soft and slow compared to the things that hunted us. But we learned that fighting back gave us a chance when nothing else would. We learned that even if we lost, we might hurt the predator enough to make it think twice about attacking the next human it saw. She held up her hands. These hands were designed to grip things, to throw things, to make tools and weapons out of whatever we could find. And that instinct is still there inside every human, even the ones like me who grew up on space stations and learned about violence from history books. Professor Thelvan's crest had risen again, a sign of intense interest. When Rexus threw that knife, my conscious mind did not have time to react. A thrown blade moves too fast for thinking. But my body knew what to do, because my body carries 300,000 years of practice. Every human who ever caught a striking snake, or deflected a thrown rock, or grabbed a falling child, left a little bit of that knowledge in our genes. She smiled, and this time it was rueful, almost embarrassed. I did not catch that knife because I am special. I caught it because I am human, and that is what humans do. We face the thing that is trying to kill us, and we deal with it. And then we try to understand why it happened so we can prevent it next time. She turned to look at the door where Rexus had been taken. He wanted to prove that I was soft. That being raised away from Earth had made me less dangerous, And in a way, he was right. I am soft. I prefer talking to fighting, and I would rather make a friend than an enemy. She turned back to the class, but soft does not mean weak. And civilized does not mean helpless. And the thing about humans is that we can be both at the same time. We can extend a hand in friendship, and if that hand gets slapped away, we can make a fist instead. Professor Thelvan spoke up then. And what would you suggest we do with Mr. Talon? Given what he attempted today, Kira thought about it for a moment. Expel him, she said. He brought a weapon to class and used it. There have to be consequences for that, or the rules mean nothing. She paused, but do not imprison him. Do not ruin his life. He did what he did because he was scared of losing his status, and he did not know how to handle that fear. He needs to learn better ways in dealing with it, and he cannot learn those ways from inside a cell. The room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the shocked stillness of before, but something more thoughtful. That is the lesson, Kira said. Not that humans are dangerous. Everyone already knew that. The lesson is that being dangerous and being kind are not opposites. You can have the power to hurt someone and choose not to use it. You can face a threat and deal with it, and then extend mercy to the person who threatened you. She looked at Professor Thelvan. That is what de-escalation really means. It means being strong enough to end a conflict violently and choosing to end it peacefully instead. The professor's crest rose to its full height. I could not have said it better myself, he said. Thank you, Miss Vasquez, for concluding today's lesson. Kira nodded and returned to her seat. Pip was still trembling, but there was something like awe in her large eyes now. You are amazing. The small creature whispered, I am human. Kira replied, it is the same thing, and somewhere in the back of her mind, in that place where 300,000 years of ancestors watched over her, something ancient and patient smiled with satisfaction. Because the Deathworld girl had not just survived today. She had taught an entire room full of aliens what it really meant to be human, and that was a victory worth more than any fight.